It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. All right, everybody. It's been a long time since I found an article that I basically agree with almost every word that's being said. So I'm going to give a shout out to Roman Pickler, who wrote this article back in 2019, so pre-pandemic times, and he was talking about product backlog size. And the question came out to him: how do we reduce the product backlog size? With the pretense that less is more, right? So we all have to come to terms that it's perfectly normal for a product backlog to change. Some backlogs will grow in size and some will shrink in size. Some become way too overly long and detailed. That makes them difficult to update, understand, prioritize, and refine. Others become so small because we're trying to isolate focus that we don't have the right scope of all the work that needs to be included. But today I want to talk to you about the really large and unruly backlog and how to get it smaller, right? How to handle it and manage it more easily. And the first, I started clapping my hands out loud, Roman, when I read the first paragraph here. It says the first thing is to split the product backlog. If you're faced with an overly long and detailed product backlog, split into two. Over time, products can serve an increasingly heterogeneous market and provide a large number of different features, some of which may not be used by all users. If that's the case for your product and your backlog, reduce the backlog size by unbundling one or more of its components and features and releasing them as products in their own right. So, So a good example of this they threw out was what Facebook did with Messenger back in 2014, which is kind of an interesting thing. But it's a good analogy because it worked, right? They spun off Messenger into a separate product, and that worked for him. It worked really well. So I guess what he's trying to say, and I teach this concept in my level 2 and level 3 product ownership classes, is that you should have a concept of a product backlog and then probably also have a concept of what I call a product owner backlog. The product owner backlog is the wish list, the big list, the the place where you put all your whims and desires and ideas as not to clutter your actual backlog. And your actual backlog should be manageable, something that you could easily get through in a single session, something that you could look at and have everyone understand, something you don't have to scroll too much through to figure things out. You should never have to search using a search bar to find items that are in your backlog. Your backlog should be managed well enough that it's small enough that you could quickly find the things that you're looking for. Now, if your product or service is incredibly large, consider splitting it, right? Splitting it's not always a bad thing. Okay, the second one he pulls up is reduce the scope. Hey, go figure. If you choose clear, specific, and measurable goals, you should be able to reduce the scope of your backlog by a percentage, right? And I'm not going to throw out a number because it's different for everybody based on the type of product and service you're working on. But I often talk about honoring WIP limits at the product or project level and understanding that just because something is not being done now doesn't mean it's unimportant. Everything that's being asked for is important. It just means that there was something else that was more urgent. And if you think about it using urgency instead of importance, nobody's ever going to tell somebody, hey, I have this really unimportant scope that I need you to work on. But they will say, I've got this important scope. And when you say, oh, well, there are these other urgent things I'm working on, I'll say, well, these aren't as urgent as that is. So I think we need to make sure we understand the whole piece about urgency, right? And setting smart goals and sticking to the smart goals and asking if something doesn't align, is it too big? Do we need to make an epic breakdown into smaller things? If not, what is it that's helping drive us, motivate us, and move us so that we can understand how to reduce the scope of the product backlog and still stay in line with the stakeholders' wishes, right? Here's another one. You can structure your backlog by hiding the details. Now, this one sounds toxic, but I can tell you now, if you use the theme epic user story model where you're just breaking things down like that, what's going to happen is, at the epic level, I might get all the reporting that I need about, where the state of things are as an executive. I'll get all the reporting I need there. But it's interesting because sometimes people leave all those details exposed, and then you end up with leadership who has questions about the very nitty gritty things that people are working on. And it makes me crazy, right? So sometimes I say, I know we're supposed to be transparent, but sometimes I say, you know, if it's something that we know we have to deliver and we already know how we're going to build it, And you don't have to put the nth degree of every single thing you're going to do. I'm going to breathe 1,763 times this hour. I mean, I might be off by two, but the point is, or 2,000. But the point is that, yeah, it's not necessary for us to spell out every detail, but it is important for us to know. Yes, speaking of details, we should aggregate the details. So if we have product backlog size that's uh, combined, you can combine detailed items, right? So if you have detailed items that are both similar, you can combine those. You can aggregate. You can reduce your backlog size by aggregating all the details and by making sure you need and have a sick desire for all the things that you're doing, right? So if you're not thrilled doing what you do, you should be doing something else. And finally, you want to eliminate those items that feel like they've risen from the dead or that they've been there forever, right? I read an article once and I referred to these as either backlog rot or zombie backlog items because they just never seem to go away, right? And over time, they just worse and worse and worse. Yeah, you know the ones I'm talking about. So avoid those at all costs, right? Or eliminate them if you can. So there you have it. So those are just a couple of tips, a couple of things that I thought about with the help of Mr. Roman Pickler, who put together a fantastic article. So I love it, love it, love it. Thank you for that. And let's see. Yeah. And you can find him on romanpickler.com. That's ROMANPICHLER.com. Another really, really strong, agile personality and someone who I consider a very dear friend. So that's going to do it for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Daily Stand Up. If you have something you'd like for us to talk about, please reach out. Don't hesitate. We'd love to talk to you some more and get some things figured out and see if we can't get your episode recorded and on the Daily Stand Up. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.